if we're recording.
Okay, just recording.
Great. Hey, everybody. So I will be emceeing today. We've got a fairly detailed agenda. If y'all can pull that up, that would be great. My plan is simply to go down the agenda, ask someone who is related to one of these projects to speak about it. And if no one's around, I'll give a brief overview. Familiar with most of them. Just kicking it off though, first thing is conference updates. There's been a number of good talks and things at conferences as well as some workshops. Yuri, I think you were involved in the tracing workshop, at least down in Austin, Texas, right? Am I talking about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this was the first workshop in the US that we've done. And I mean, there was a good turnout. I think there was a good participation. The one lesson that I took away from that is, one is that we were expecting people of various skill sets to come to the workshop, from like beginners to advanced, and that's not the case. Usually all people are very beginners there. So we shouldn't like expect experts to be at those workshops. I mean, they may show up just to talk, but not really do any exercises anyway.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that we want, and there's an issue now opened in a spec repo about like more of a tutorial steps that we can show people, which takes you from like very basic hello world where a single function is traced to slightly more complex examples, like maybe to two servers use case. And we need that in at least 3 languages, Python, Java, and Go, because those seem to be the most popular ones at the workshops. And so, yeah, I know Brian just ran another workshop in San Jose. He only had Go and Python, no Java examples.
Yeah, it would be great to consolidate a bunch of examples into one place and eventually put that stuff up on the website. And there's also been talk about, maybe like an OpenTracing cookbook or something along those lines, especially with the in-process context propagation. There are some patterns that are still a little tricky. So it would be great to just have all the instrumentation patterns in one spot. Do you mind putting a link to that GitHub issue in the agenda? So people
Okay.
can... Thanks. Great. And I think there may have been a workshop in San Jose, but I was not there and haven't encountered anyone who was there for that at Velocity, I think. So, but I don't think anyone on the call was there. So, oh well. Does anyone else have any conference or talk updates? Any links to talks that they want to spread around? Feel free to put them in the meeting notes.
Are you talking about the Paris workshop as well, or the?
There was a workshop in Paris?
Yeah, last week.
Oh, can you tell us about that?
Oh, I wasn't there. Was anyone there? Ben was there.
Ben was there.
He was there.
Well, you mean there was a Zipkin workshop, right?
Yeah, it's titled the Distributed Tracing Workshop, but yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. I think that is less of a workshop in the sense of getting, like walkthroughs and tutorials for people new to it. I think that's more of a meeting of people who build tracing systems who want to like hash it out. And yeah, I would love a follow up from that. Maybe the next meeting we can get that, or we can get someone to come on to Gitter and give a brief update or point us at any outcomes that came out of that, because I would also like to know what they're up to.
Yeah, I mean, the only big thing that happened was the announcement of that Google's open.
Sorry, Google's what?
Open Census project.
Oh, that is also news to me.
Okay, yeah, it was news to a lot of people, but it was basically announced. I mean, I'm only passing the notes from that workshop, but it was basically announced that Google's working on a open source tracing and metrics library.
Oh,
Basically compete with open.
cool.
Uh,
Do you know if they're interested in using OpenTracing with it, or are they moving on their own standard?
yeah, it seems like they're basically moving on their own standard, and they're going instead from an abstract API and vendor implementation model to a concrete implementation and vendor plugin model.
And
They're also trying to bring metrics together with the tracing API to consolidate those two concerns somehow, and then have a whole story for local aggregation of traces that turn into metrics and then output plugins basically.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very fresh. Like it only just got discussed last week, and I figured some people here would have been coming from that, but I guess no one here. I think Bas Van Beek was there.
Yeah, we're missing a couple key players today.
Yeah, okay. But I'll just share the link here.
Nice.
And it's very early days, but that's what I heard, is that they're going to be basically pioneering a new open source instrumentation library.
Cool. That's interesting. I do like the idea of combining your metrics for tracing or combining your implementation for tracing and metrics. I think we've got a Java metrics project at the bottom of our agenda list here that's beginning of an attempt to do that through OpenTracing. So that's interesting that they're also going that direction. Okay, enough about them. Let's talk about us.
Cool.
So there's a number of API updates coming along. 3 languages in particular are getting an overhaul, but what's interesting is they're all at different states. So Python has been in production and is now adding the in-process context propagation stuff that we added to Java. So that's going on. There's also PHP. Prior to this point, we haven't had an official PHP instrumentation API. So that's coming along. And then C++, there was some work being done on a C++ 98 API, but we decided to set that aside and go with a C++ 11 API for now, and then maybe come back to that 98. So that's a quick overview of the 3 languages that are seeing some changes. And then there's also some discussion around API rollout and compatibility practices. We got feedback from Java when the latest Java rollout went out, and there's room for improvement there. And so I think we can talk about that, especially in the context of Python. So going back to the top of that list and digging in, is anyone from the Python team here? Is Matt Perpick on the line, or Manu or Carlos? Maybe. Matt said he was going to be here for at least some of the time, so maybe he'll show up later. But
Manu was not able to make it. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm kind of representing him, but I'm fairly new on the team, so I'm still coming up to speed.
Okay. Well, I've talked to, I work with Carlos, and I talked to Matt recently. So my understanding is that work is coming to a close soon. I think there's one large outstanding PR that Manu wants to get through, and then we'll maybe have something that looks like a release candidate. So at that point, getting a wider audience to review it would be great. And then we also want to kind of discuss a rollout strategy for the Python API. Some strategy of ensuring that some tracer and combination of things is available for testing it, having a release candidate, making sure major things like gEvent and async have some instrumentation done with the release candidate, making sure at least several tracers have bound to the release candidate and test driven it before we launch it as the next version. I'll be working with people on the Python thing to make sure we land that properly, and I'll be doing outreach to people who have Python tracers, especially open source ones, to kind of test drive it. And in the longer run, we'd like to sort of hammer out some of those approaches and formalize it a bit in the specification. And so there's a GitHub issue, API rollout and compatibility practices. You can see it in the agenda links discussing, this is the beginning of a discussion for what that should look like. But I think some of that will happen in the context of Python because it's the next one up. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the new Python API? Maybe going once, going twice? Okay, well, there's always Gitter. And you can, of course, check out those pull requests. So next one up is PHP. This is brand new. A couple people are working on different implementations, and I think they're trying to boil it down to one implementation. Is Felix on the phone? I think I saw him. Or maybe Mr. Chavez.
Hi. So yeah, we are kind of after the issue you create in the placeholder. So we tried to settle with one implementation. Ben and Felix has been collaborating with me, reviewing the pull requests in order to get rid of the concerns they had with the original implementation. We arrived to a point that more or less we all are happy with what we have in the library. Anyways, we would like to, as we were discussing early with Ben, we would like to wait for the Python active expanse source to be merged, discussed and merged, and then we do the counterpart in the PHP, and maybe after that we can have a first release.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, so one question that we are having is when and how we will merge the library from Jose Carlos' repository into the official GitHub organization?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the main blocker there was probably picking, which implementation we were going to go with as a baseline. I think if everyone who has been involved in the PHP effort is agreed that, there is an implementation that is like mostly correct, you probably move it in as a release candidate just to get people's attention on it and to kind of, scope a bit and then continue to refine it from there. So I think I would be fine with that if that's where the three of you are at.
I think we are going with the Jose Carlos repository. So we've been working on that for the last 1-2 weeks to get all the feedback from the different implementations in. And I think the last major change was merged today. And there's an open pull request already for the active span source thing that is similar to the way Python implements it. And so that is why, I would be super happy if we wait with the first release until we can also ship the active span stuff, because the other libraries are probably having a bigger problem with backwards compatibility because of this big change.
Yeah, that I definitely agree that stuff should go in sooner rather than later. But at the same time, because it doesn't seem like anyone is blocking, we could go ahead and just move that work and just start doing the remainder of the work out of the OpenTracing repo, just to raise awareness of it. as long as there's something slapped on the README that lets people understand what state it's currently in, I think that's probably the most important thing. So people don't start relying on it without the understanding that there's a, you know, this is a release candidate. There's a couple big changes that are about to come in. So.
Okay. Yeah.
So something I would like to do is to gather some ideas about how we can get more feedback from some other people. Like we three have been discussing it very actively, but like I don't know, it will be nice to have a chat with someone who could actually implement it. Like in my company, we were about to implement it until we started with this settlement about the standard. After that, we will go for it. But it will be nice to gather some other information from the community.
Yeah.
You talked about getting a couple of different language bindings in and getting the active span stuff included. What strikes me is when I look at OpenTracing IO, the conceptual model doesn't mention anything about active span. So there's some kind of a gap in the docs here if it's possible to add something that's that important and it doesn't affect the conceptual model that you're publishing. So is there something we can address that?
Yeah. Something I also mentioned it to Ben earlier is that in some pull requests about active span, I saw that they pointed out something about a specification 0.3, which doesn't show anywhere. At least I couldn't find it. So it would be nice to give more visibility to this and maybe to link in the libraries. We started doing these changes for the new features.
Yeah. I think there could be more work done. I think OpenTracing in general needs kind of a documentation overhaul. And while the basic model in the specification, I think is good, the actual language of the specification could probably use some work. It's very Englishy. There are areas I think we know where it's not specific enough, or at least questions that keep coming up. So there's definitely a round of refinement that could be done there. It's sort of a chicken egg thing of like, when do we do that? Do we try to like shore up these APIs and then shore up the spec, or go the other direction and like shore up the spec and then implement? And there's like actually a philosophical thing there of like, should the specification be a representation of what is real, or should the specification be, you know, something that's aspirational that we then try to convene on?
So if you're trying to be cross-language, that's going to have to change your bias, I think, a little bit from just a single language where someone can just look at the code. Here it's, which code do I look at?
Yeah, exactly. I would love to see a sort of effort to kind of, maybe we can open an issue on the specification and kind of start cataloging some of these things. I think it would be great to maybe get a chunk of it together and attack it that way first. So if someone would like to start that would be great. As far as like the actual rollout and getting attention, I do think that's the main thing we need to hash out with APIs. There's issues around like backwards compatibility guarantees that we need to really start paying attention to. But even without those, in the case of PHP, for example, there's still this question of when you roll it out, how do you know you've gotten enough attention? How do you know you've gotten the right kind of attention? So there isn't some situation where you see this happen all the time where, you know, people don't pay attention until something's 1.0 and then they go use it and then they're like, hey, what'd you do? And so we would like to avoid that. So I can kind of help do some cat herding with you guys to make sure there's at least a couple of tracers that have implemented this, and a couple of major things that libraries, for example, that we attempt to instrument during the release candidate process. So we're not releasing something and then finding out whether or not it works.
You opened the initial OpenTracing PHP issue and linked to a Jaeger issue about adding the instrumentation. Is this coming from users from Jaeger to add PHP support, or did it come from you internally? You're still mic'd. You're muted.
Sorry. So we don't have PHP at Uber, so we don't have anyone planning to work on the implementation.
Do you have a contact from someone who wanted to implement this? So maybe we can put them onto the...
I don't recall anyone asking about that.
Okay. Okay.
If we have an issue, we can see if there's someone.
Okay. Okay. Fine.
Yep.
This is Matt talking. We have some people who want to use PHP. I can see, including I think some people who are already using tracing in other languages who may be good beta customers. If you hit me up in Gitter after, I can take a look and see if we can dig some up.
Great. And just so people know, there's now an OpenTracing PHP sub-channel where a lot of this has been going on. Just FYI, if you don't see that. I think Gitter isn't always great about highlighting these subrooms. Good to hear your voice, Matt. We went over Python briefly just now, but now that you're here, do you want to give a recap of where that's at?
Yeah. I haven't been working on it personally over the last few weeks, so I'm a little bit out of touch, but I talked with Manu earlier. He wrote me a brief summary. I think it basically, he basically said, let me recap, that there's like three, basically I think, sounds like Ben and maybe Carlos are leaning towards having more of a direct port of the Java API. He also got some feedback from, I guess, Adrian and some folks at Google who he met in an OpenTracing workshop, who I think were leaning in the other direction. So I think it's basically a kind of a fork in the road. I would basically encourage anybody who cares to read it and comment now. Next week, I should see Manu, and so I'm gonna hopefully try to crack the whip and get it rolling. But that's basically about as much as I know right now.
My understanding is some of the debate has to do with what should be supported as far as context management, in particular callbacks, just straight userland functions which is how Tornado used to do things. Should that be supported? And that, I think, complicates things if you want to go all the way out to that edge. And so I think that's one of the debates there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been like plugged in enough to like chime in on my opinion. I do want us to see us like I think the most important thing is that we figure out how we need to make a decision, and the people who want to make that decision and just make a call and hopefully drive that a little bit would be good.
Yeah, it's like make a call and then make sure we do proper evangelizing and make sure while it's a release candidate, Zipkin, whoever else is interested in this has at least used it and been like giving it the thumbs up to be like this is a workable solution for us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think it's going to be actually tricky to find somebody for that edge that people are actually concerned about, because I don't think people actually write code that way in practice. So, but I also can understand why you want the foundational underpinnings to be as sound as possible. So, yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, we definitely shouldn't. We won't be able to solve it in this meeting, but people please check out the pull request. And then there's also, just like PHP, OpenTracing Python has its own subroom where this stuff can be debated in detail. So we should get people in there. Maybe we can have a roundtable specifically around the Python thing at some point, maybe next week or after you guys get it to a spot where Manu and you and Carlos are happy with it.
Sounds good. I'll talk with Manu next week.
Perfect. Cool. Okay. Moving on to C++ 11. I don't think Ryan is on the call. Ryan, do you happen to be hanging around? I don't think he is. that's fine. I'm happy to talk about this a bit. The way things were going in C++ was there was an attempt to make a sort of 98 API, and the idea would be you would then maybe wrap that API in a C++ 11 API that would be nicer. And there was a lot of bike shedding, and no one really came to an agreement on what that 98 API should look like. And it never got really finished. In the meantime, a number of tracers had C++ implementations, and stuff started getting instrumented basically with OpenTracing compliant tracers, but without using the C++ API. And that got kind of far enough along in things like Envoy and Nginx and other places where we started to feel like there was this backlog of stuff we wanted to contribute back to the OpenTracing community, but couldn't because the API was sort of unfinished. And what seemed to be the best way forward that everyone who was involved in, directly involved in the previous API agreed to was to put 98 aside for the moment and to adopt something based on the Lightstep C++ 11 API. So that PR is there and just about ready to be pulled in. So we would love people to take a look at that. We've got that running in production in some places, and we think it's pretty solid. But because it's C++, there are, of course, some design decisions that we made. So if you care about C++, please take a look at that. I'll do, again, as part of API rollouts, try to actually tap some people to actually implement this, which I think will end up basically being me and Ryan and some people. We'll try to make sure there's at least a Zipkin C++ implementation that binds to this and works in Envoy. And then we'll instrument Envoy with that. And that will be the sort of proof of concept that this new API is workable.
Sorry. So there was some guy asking for the library written in C. Is this still something, or that guy went for the C++ one? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do recall someone coming into Gitter and asking whether or not there was something in C, and I believe he got pointed at the right place. There's currently there's nothing written in C currently. So far, we've had success because these things tend to be plugins, being able to bind in with the C++ 11 API. Even if the original stuff like Nginx is written in C, they usually allow these kinds of instrumentation plugins to be written in whatever you want. So we haven't seen a need yet for an API like that, and there's just a lot of difficulty finding an agreement on an API that was at the C and C++ 98 level. So the new API specifically has a space in the repository for a 98 implementation to go, should someone want to pick that back up and start working on it. We just decided to just basically avoid that for the time being and go with C++ 11 because it's just easier in that language to make an API that was kind of clean and matched what the other APIs were doing.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions about C++ 11? All right. Moving on, we've talked a bit about API rollout and compatibility practices in the context of these three APIs. I think this is still a work in progress in OpenTracing. There is an issue that is linked to in the agenda about hashing through what it is that we actually want. And then we're going to, kind of have the next practice run at this will be Python and then PHP. So hopefully we can just iterate towards something that feels solid through the process of rolling those APIs out and gather feedback along the way. But if you're interested in this in the abstract, please join that thread and talk about it on Gitter.
Ted, on that topic, maybe because Java hasn't been officially released as 1.0, I wonder if we could consider also making it backwards compatible with like pre-0.30 versions. I don't know if we introduced any breaking changes exactly.
You mean with the latest release of Java that went out? That definitely had backwards compatibility issues. That was one of the complaints. But yeah, I think we need a 1.0 of Java to kind of put. There's like a couple small outstanding things that need to get dealt with around like the byte buffer and stuff like that. But you're right.
Are there any?
That also needs to get rolled in, and we need to hash out what 1.0 means for people.
Are there any significant proposed features for the Java API?
No. If you look on GitHub, I'll put this into the meeting notes. There is a milestone and a couple of open issues that have been tagged with that milestone. So let me post. I'll post that right in. So Java 1.0 milestone. So have a look at that. That is, as far as I'm aware, the remaining work, and it's mostly small potatoes.
So in terms of the criteria for saying it's release ready, you're going to do it purely based on the API, or do you want to make sure that you have a couple of the library instrumentations working with this API too? Kind of look like what's MVP here. I hate to sound like a marketing guy, but I have to.
Yeah.
You got like someone say doing a Spring implementation and they haven't actually proven it out with the API. I think there's still a gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Important.
I don't think we need to like decide it in this meeting. We should, do that discussion thread. But yeah, my 2 cents are there should be a release candidate phase, and that phase has just a checklist where we say you need to get at least a couple of tracers and at least some, major libraries or things.
Yeah.
But whatever was causing that API change was for a reason. So prove that you solved that before
we solved it, didn't break everybody else too.
Yeah. And do it in a way that also isn't just like a call. I think what happened on the last one was everyone who was involved in the thread knew what was up. And we're sort of like, hey, come look at it. Come look at it. And then of course, no one really does until the moment, like the last moment or the moment after that, when it shows up, as a release in their Maven history or whatever.
In this particular case, it was looked at it because A, the compile broke, and B, what the heck is an active state, active span, and where is it in the docs? And
right. Yeah. And so that was a mess, right? So that was like Baby's first major change, and of course a bunch of people spoke up at that point, and so now we need to figure out how to make sure like all of those stakeholders have given this thing some kind of explicit thumbs up, so we can at least feel like it's been vetted and works, and also that like people in the community are aware that this is coming.
Yep.
So no one feels like it's just something that landed on top of them. So, yeah, I don't have a specific plan for how we do that, but I agree that we need something like that.
What's the world look like for testing tracers for the Java stuff? I've been working on the test suite for the Go tracer implementation, and I didn't see anything similar to the Python or Go harness for Java. And I've caught a lot of bugs in my tracer, just having to read the spec and then writing tests against it, and then catching things where, for example, nil wasn't returned in certain cases or stuff like that.
I agree. I think it would be really helpful to have like a standardized test suite such that, you call the APIs in a standard way and have it just return some that it can then be verified in a cross-language compatible way. I understand that not all tracer implementations produce traces, but I still think it would be a useful abstraction.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about what you've got in Python and Go, Chris?
So I ported what Yuri wrote for Python, and it's in a pull request here. I actually just linked to a comment where an assumption I made about the error case, where if you try to extract a context that isn't valid, isn't even a valid struct for your own tracer implementation, I was assuming a nil return from reading the language of the comment for the extract method in the tracer interface, and Yuri wasn't returning a nil return value in that error case from the Jaeger instrumentation. And so there's this 4-bullet I wrote the comment. Yeah, there's like 4 bullets here, and the 4th one says, oh, it doesn't exactly specify a nil return for this error case, but I just assumed it meant a nil return, and I went and coded up a test against that. And my own tracer does that, but I didn't, there's a lot of there's a lot of differences between tracers that programmers might assume, the return values and other things, and also just checking compatibility against context propagation. I've got tests that check if you're trying to write 2 different baggage values with case insensitive, but same values that aren't case sensitive safe, so that you try to propagate them across HTTP. What happens there? I test a lot of corner cases around spans being in the same trace, and so I have a couple of probe methods that ask you, okay, I don't want to know how your tracer works, but can you at least give me a probe interface where I can assert that this span and this span context are the same, or these 2 spans are in the same trace, and then I can at least test propagation across the wire by extracting, injecting, and then checking and asking this probe interface, hey, are these 2 spans in the same trace, and then get some kind of guarantee that propagation is working. And so I have a whole bunch of tests here that check for various nil and error values, a lot of stuff around error values and error returns, and then there's some stuff around baggage propagation and context propagation.
Yeah. I think it's fabulous.
You could pretty much port all of this straight to Java, I assume, with some magic. With a lot of the similar kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of test coverage. And so this was really helpful for me getting to 100% test coverage for my tracer.
Yeah.
You're just becoming someone owning it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we need that in every language. I think that's a fabulous facility.
And then you could imagine having a matrix where it's like, oh, so-and-so's tracer supports baggage, and this other person's tracer, only supports context, or blah, blah, blah. And you could at least get an understanding of the differences between things.
That would be great. Is there anyone on the call who's interested in bottom lining, porting this test harness to Java? Am I that lucky? I'm never that lucky. Okay. We'll do some community wrangling about that, but let me see. I'm going to add that, though, as a thing that was on the agenda, because that's worthy of its own thing here.
I would certainly be willing to be involved in that, but I still have a lot on my plate in terms of getting ramped up and to speed on the existing project within my company. So
great.
I can't commit to that quite yet.
Okay. Thanks.
Ted, maybe we should have a section in both specification repo as an issue and even maybe on the documentation side as a section saying like, these are the high priority things that we need people to either look at or help with. And like we can decide on these calls which are the high priority items.
I see. So there's sort of a place people can go to see just like what's hot in OpenTracing. What are the issues of the day? Yeah.
How you can help basically. It's like,
yeah, wading through all those issues and all those GitHub repos is like impossible. So
I almost wonder if a compatibility test suite would be useful for the version 1 milestone within Java, or if that's not worth blocking the release.
I could totally see that being part of a 1.0 Like,
I agree. I would, yeah.
yeah, that's a great idea. And going be pointed to. Okay, great. I've got that in there. Okay, Yuri, do you mind making an issue or something to like a sort of holder space for the issues of the day? I don't know if we can come up with what those are on this call, but if we could have that ready to go, you know, in time for the next meeting, that would be awesome. Sweet.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So I think that concludes talking about the API updates. It's 9:10, so we got about 20 minutes. But I think the rest of the stuff is a little bit faster. So specification updates, there's a number of various outstanding issues. The thing I flagged just for discussion here to kind of point people at is, you know, as time goes on, there's a push to standardize more and more tags. And there's a question about like, well, what is the process for standardizing a tag? Is it that we get together and think that this is a good idea and there's a clear use case and this looks like a good solution, and so that's the standard, and then people adopt it? Or do we first go and kind of by fiat start giving meanings to certain tags and have tracers agree that those tags have those meanings, and then go and try to standardize them? So that's the sort of basic question. And then there's also the question of like, is there like a literal process that we can walk people through, like certain, you know, just how does something get approved or not? And there are several outstanding tags that are being debated right now. And you can see why there's some debate over some of these. So there's a protocol tag that seems a little nebulous to me, but there's obviously a need for something like it. The service tag is a thing that I care about because we've been trying to deal with multiplexing, where you are reading logs out of Hoproxy or some other thing, and you're trying to, you know, report on behalf of multiple separate services or processes. So you can have a look at that issue. And then there's an issue with log level for people who are doing logging and other things with their tracing. Should there be a way for tracers to have priority or some other mechanism for choosing whether or not they report these logs? So those are examples of attempts at standardizing tags. Again, I don't have a great answer for how we should do this. There is a discussion thread. I don't think we can solve it on this meeting, but I do want to bring it up for people that this is like an area of active debate, and we should sort out sooner rather than later how we're going to do this, because there's going to be an infinite stream of tags we want to standardize, basically. Does anyone have any thoughts or concerns on this particular subject they want to voice at this time? Everybody cares. This is getting too far from the bike shed and too close to the nuclear reactor that is specifying things. Hard to have an opinion on this one.
I guess I'm just interested to see how it'll play out. Like maybe I think there needs to be sort of like a whip cracker, basically, who forces discussions to happen, and we try to like have some sort of a deadline for a decision. I think that's basically the main, I think, challenge that I think I'm sort of seeing.
Yeah. And I know, like, for example, I want the service tag to happen, and so I'm willing to to round up some community, go talk to some tracers, convince them that, you know, they want to support this use case too, and get people to do it, and then come back and just kind of make it happen. But that's like also a little bit of just like ruled by fiat. It's like, it happened, so
you may want to think about just like trying to, I wouldn't like try to like set a process too early, but at least maybe having a timeline on like a reasonable window for feedback, and like all of the core group, I think, should do their best to respond within that window. And if not, you either take it as a silent no or a silent yes. At our company, we do it as a silent yes, but that's way easier to do in a company than in.
Yeah. I'm willing to say that because we're looking at making a standard, it's like a standard is almost a purely additive process. And so the default answer should always be no. I think Yuri has been pretty good at putting his foot down on that front when stuff comes flying through, around being like, no, prove that we need this, prove this is the right way to do it, prove that there's support for this. But yeah, if you can prove that there's a general like push to have this, the use cases are real. It's just a question of like, once you've done that work, how can you make sure that you know, no one's going to say like, hey, like you just did it, like how dare you? So, and I don't quite know what that part of the process looks like.
So may I throw out a suggestion?
Sure.
What if somebody, so when somebody wanted to standardize a tag, you put in the documentation for it that says, okay, this is the tag that will be effective on a such and such date, effective standard. And during that period, you have to go in and put in the work to actually apply that tag to the contributed instrumentation to see its value and show that that you're committed to making sure that that tag is valuable and supported across the instrumentation. So like, that might be an interesting coupling there, so that you know, you have some time period for proposal, plus you're also making sure that it's well supported in the process.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think my only concern with the do it first, standardize later, which I think is generally correct, is like, what happens if you get into the middle of it and then it doesn't go that way? Then there's like stuff out in production and in various places that works in a sort of now half supported manner.
Well, the other option would be to just have a big list of PRs to the standard document plus to each of the tracing contributions. But then you have a bunch of PRs, and I think that having like that proposal in a PR is much less visible than having it in the actual official document with like a tentative flag with like maybe a proposed date or something like that.
I like that. I think we shouldn't yet totally debate the whole thing here, but these are good ideas. And I think one thing that was brought up was, especially in particular with tags, or specification changes in general, there being an incubation period where we agree this does look like standardizable, this does seem valid, but you still want to, like you say, maybe put it in the spec or otherwise get it out of a PR, but also have it be in a period where we're still allowing ourselves the opportunity to change our minds about it if it turns out something serious that we didn't think about at first. Just because it is a standard and we don't want to be really versioning this standard, we want to be adding things to it, but we don't want to be like, we changed everything. Like, you know, and I find often with these things, the effects can be subtle. So you don't always know what they're going to be when you first start. And that's the advantage of really putting things through their paces in production before before adding them to the standard. So yeah, like you were saying, something that lets us have an intermediary zone would maybe help with that.
Got a question. What are going to be the means for with the discussion about if the specification should reflect what we have, or it should be a positive specification? What are going to be the channels?
The channels for making specification changes?
No. For deciding whether the specification will be a reflect of what we have in place, or if it will be a positive one.
Yeah, so there is a discussion. So if you look at the meeting notes, there's a GitHub issue talking about this, and then there's Gitter. And I think those are really the two primary communication channels right now for debating.
Okay.
So I think it's just going to happen there.
I just would like to clarify, GitHub is the preferred way because it keeps history. With Gitter, it's like you get lost in the discussion, and or if you have like high throughput discussion in Gitter, then just pop some summary into a GitHub issue.
I think that's great. But I do think, like something you mentioned earlier, Yuri, about there being something on the website or some more centralized place that explains to people what the state of OpenTracing is would be helpful. Because when you go, it's hard to figure out what's going on just by looking at this sea of GitHub issues, right? Like I do agree that like that specification issue on like what shall be the process for doing all the things. It's like a really important issue, but it's just like hanging out there right next to, you know, other stuff that's like, hey, here's a bug maybe we should fix.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to see the way GitHub's UI currently works. So maybe that's really the solution is have something that's more of a awareness raising place that people can get used to checking. Okay, so we got about 7 minutes left. Why don't we spend that? I just want to do a brief shout out on some instrumentation updates. And then we can call it closed with any closing questions people have. Just to go over these real quickly so that people know they're out there. One is spring instrumentation. So something I'm kicking off with Pavel from Red Hat is there's just a steady increase of instrumentations for things that are part of the Spring framework for Java. And we would like to create a repo that started to house a lot of auto configurations, compatibility tests to make sure if you're using all this instrumentation together, there isn't some weird transitive dependency problem. Basically, just some stuff to make the Spring tracing ecosystem more coherent. We were also looking at Sleuth, which is a sort of Zipkin-based Spring instrumentation system, to see if we could plug into that rather than creating like a parallel pile of instrumentations. But that looked like it was sort of a bad fit. The Sleuth observer API wasn't really designed to have you put your tracer on the outside. So it kind of works, but it didn't seem to be sufficient to get out of just having OpenTracing instrumentation for these projects.
Are the maintainers of Sleuth interested in doing switching like to OpenTracing?
They are not at this point. We did talk to them. They made the very valid point that they are off in production and have a working thing, and the OpenTracing APIs, while they look fine, are still changing, right? Like the Java thing just changed, and so they felt like it was too soon to be making major API change on their part to support this stuff. And I also think their model, because it was presumed a Zipkin-based system, I think they would have to significantly change some things about how it works to really support OpenTracing. For example, you can do things like create spans and whatnot through constructors outside of the tracer. But in OpenTracing, that's a no-no. The tracer is in charge of that because who knows what that span is that it's creating. So stuff like that, I think, means that it's not going to be like a great fit until they decide it's like very important. So, oh well. I don't think it's a huge deal though, because like these things are getting instrumented naturally anyways. They're just like instrumentations for these various components are just rolling in. RxJava showed up like a couple weeks ago, for example. So I think we just want a repo to kind of corral all this stuff as it's coming in. All right. And there's a GitHub issue there. If you're interested in that, get a hold of me and Pavel on Gitter if you're interested in Spring instrumentation. Kafka, just a quick shout out here, because I think this is important. The latest version of Kafka, version 11, supports record headers. So there's actually a place to put metadata in Kafka now. And so we've updated the Java Kafka client to use this. So it only works with the latest version of Kafka, but that's a pretty major thing there. So check that out. If you're interested in Kafka, this would probably be a good time to start writing OpenTracing instrumentation for Kafka clients in other languages. Last but not least, I just want to give a shout out to this Java metrics project that showed up. I think Yuri, you worked on this, yeah?
It was Gary.
Yeah, Gary Brown as well. I just thought it was cool to see that time series and metrics collection starting to come out of OpenTracing. So I thought that was great. But it also raised this issue around Trace Observer API, which is like, I think, trickier than it should be to make given the current way OpenTracing works. But it seems like we want to do these kinds of, extra collection services, and we'd like to have a standard observer API for people to write things that aren't full tracers but use the OpenTracing API. So I think this is just a place where we have some work to do. So I thought I would call it out for that reason.
Yeah, and for performance reasons, we have in Jaeger clients an internal observer and metrics implementation, which we standardize across languages, like as far as the naming patterns of metrics. Yeah, so we didn't actually use that package from Gary.
Nice, great. Okay, and we're basically at the end. We have a question here. Are there existing OpenTracing integrations, work in progress in other CNCF projects? Whose question was that?
That was mine. I know of one PR in Prometheus where they were trying to integrate, sorry, not Prometheus, in Kubernetes. They were trying to integrate OpenTracing and bind it to Jaeger at least. So I think it would be interesting to see how we can get like more CNCF projects to use OpenTracing.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. It seems like most of those things in CNCF are written in Go.
Yeah.
OpenTracing support is strong, so you should be able to tackle that at this point. All right, and we are at 9:30. Does anyone have any final questions? Chris?
I had something at the end of last month's agenda that I forgot to drag to this month's agenda, and I just wanted to plug this proposal to add span references after the span's been created, and potentially add a parent of reference type, just rounding out the compatibility with Xtrace and event-based tracers like Jonathan Mace was talking about in February. And also kind of similar to what we're seeing from other tracing implementations, where this idea of links and being able to add links to different spans after a span's been created. Just no one's really commented yet on my issue and also Jonathan Mace's issues.
Okay, great. Yeah, do you mind posting the link in to the meeting notes?
I put it. Oh yeah, sure, we'll do.
But yeah, that does sound important.
It'd be cool. Yeah, there's this idea of being able to do fan out or fan in stuff where you can't just put it all in at the span of creation time, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Nice. All right. Thank you very much, Chris, for carrying that torch. Any other questions or comments before we end the call?
It was nice to meet you all.
Yeah, you too, Tyler. All right, this is great. Congratulations, everyone. Also, congratulations to Ben, who can't be with us for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
All right. See y'all later. Ciao.
Bye.